How you doing, everybody? Hello. A much-needed win in this one here tonight. It's early in the season, obviously. There's a long way to go. We got many more games, many more months to get through. But I felt like this one, they needed to get this one here tonight. Going on the road to Chicago. Yeah, I know it's the White Sox. They're pretty terrible overall. But I felt like you needed this one for a good team-building win, right? These kind of wins where you play some gritty baseball for the last few days. It's been cold, hard-fought games. You're trying to do everything you can to try and push some runs across the board. Hasn't been able to get it going your way. And then you grind out a win here in the final game of the series to avoid the sweep. You're going happy on this trip to Chicago. Again, I felt like this was a needed win just to build up some team morale. You're going to have to go through these stretches where you're trying to figure things out. You got to go through some times of adversity where you just seem like you can't find any answers. Maybe they found something here to get them on the right track here. And hey, you do got a pretty easy series. At least, hopefully it ends up being that way. Going to Chicago gets you on the right track. But what did I say all series? All you got to do when it's cold, when the weather's not going your way, when you get into the summer months, everything's warm, the bats are feeling good, everything's feeling good. Yeah, that's a little different. But when it comes to these cold games, just put the bat in the ball and see what happens. And that's what happened with the Red Sox here tonight. Trevor Story with the walk-off dribbler. It's really all you got to do at the end of the day. And the Red Sox today, while the Blue Jays, they found a way to end up on top in the first few games. The Red Sox found a way to grind it out today. Good win overall. But when you're focusing on some other things here, we learned a lot in this series, I think, where you're going to have to make some kind of adjustments, I think. I'm not saying you need to make any drastic changes, but, maybe move some guys around in the order a little bit. Maybe bump a guy down here and there. I'm looking at Wilyer Abreu. Something jumped off the page to me today where you had Wilyer Abreu. This has happened 2 games in a row now where he's coming up to the plate where, he could do some damage and, possibly send the Red Sox home with a win, where he got intentionally walked both times. Why? Because he got Seti right behind him. I mean, why wouldn't the Blue Jays walk Wilyer Abreu in that situation late in the game with the winning run in scoring position? I think they need to make some kind of an adjustment there. And I'm looking right there at the cleanup spot. Tristan Casas still looks like he's trying to figure it out. Whether if it's an approach thing, maybe something mechanically, whatever it may be. I think Casas maybe bumping down in the order a little bit might help him out. And I feel like with Wilyer Abreu, who is off to a good start this year, maybe try batting him cleanup, kind of freshen things up a little bit, maybe, try something a little new going against the White Sox here and see what happens. I've been seeing a lot of people, with Seti, not able to come through here tonight. People already calling for Roman Anthony. You got to remember Roman Anthony. Yes, we're all very excited about him, but he's not exactly, ripping the cover off the ball down in AAA. He's still trying to get himself going a little bit down there as well. He's had a couple of hard hit balls down there, but I think for Roman, I'd like to see him get more into a bit of a groove down in AAA. So I'm not going to expect Roman Anthony just yet. Hey, if who knows? Probably not. But if the Red Sox end up shocking us and they call up Roman Anthony, then I'll be the first one that's pretty excited about it. But I'm going to say that doesn't happen. We'll talk about that in just a little bit here. We're going to have a Q&A. We always do it at the end of series. If you want to go drop in a question or a comment, go to my Twitter. And I have a post there. Just go to my Twitter account. Go leave a question or a comment there. But, maybe, to try and get this lineup into a bit of a groove, maybe an adjustment wouldn't hurt necessarily. I'm also looking at Walker Buehler here today. Walker Buehler. Listen, Walker Buehler, man, you kind of felt the frustration. Well, not even kind of. You felt the frustration from him. You heard the frustration from him after his last start, saying, he really needs to get himself going. Best start as a Red Sox to date. Looked great today. We'll get to the breakdown with him in just a little bit here, but really liked what Walker Buehler was doing today. Just to give you a quick reaction on that. he was really just, just working in it, all of his pitches, right? Mixing and matching, changing eye levels, not blowing away guys, right? But having a pretty solid outing along the way. Really liked what Walker Buehler did tonight. And the bullpen, hey, give it up for the bullpen as well. They held it down for the most part. The Blue Jays, he had the ghost runner. They were able to get a run across the board. But, good job for the bullpen for the most part, holding it down. And we will be getting to the White Sox at the end of this post-game recap. Hey, old friend Chase Migdroth getting called up for the White Sox. Remember, he went to the White Sox in the Garrett Crochet trade. I'm pretty high on Chase Migdroth, man. I remember when that trade went down, and I saw his name there, and I'm like, oh, the White Sox. They did pretty good here. The fact that they got Kyle Teel, a high upside bat in Braden Montgomery, Kyle Teel, getting back to him, I think he has the potential to be a stud catcher. I mean, the guy has a tremendous bat. And you also got Chase Migdroth in that deal. He's going to be making his debut with the White Sox. I think he could absolutely break out with the White Sox. He is such a good player, a very high floor player that gets on base. So the Red Sox will get to see an old friend going to Chicago. But I see a lot of familiar faces in the chat. Yankees fan, Robbie, is this your new channel? Yes, this is Monster Territory. We are now partnered with the Foul Territory Network. Thanks for stopping by. We got a lot of familiar faces. Wonder Davey, how you doing? The mighty Boston Penguin fan, how you doing, my friend? Hello, hello, hello. But everybody, before I get into the post-game breakdown, we have a new sponsor for today. As always, going to let the guys over at Foul Territory take over on that one.
AJ, it is time for people to get some new clubs, and to do that, they need to go to their local PXG for a fitting, right?
No doubt. I was there today. I've been there before. Last time I was there, they gave me this killer gap wedge. Look at that sweet spot, Scott. It is worn out. That is right in the sweet spot right there. So I went and got new clubs today, new irons. But more importantly, I got this bad boy. I got me a new putter. This is my old putter. It's on order. Yes, that's my putter cover. PXG Mustang putter. Now I'm going to the Allen putter. They talked me into it because I was draining some putts today. Bob, the guy who helped me out, he helped me with my irons. He got them teed up perfectly. But then we went to the putting green. I was draining them putts because that's the most important part of golf.
PXG fittings are fun. Schedule your fitting today. As you can hear from AJ, for a limited time, you could save up to 20% on your entire order. Head over to pxg.com/foul. That's pxg.com/foul to save up to 20% on your entire order. pxg.com/FOUL. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Okay, go check that out. If you're into golf, they got a great deal going right now. Again, use the code FOUL and go get yourself some new clubs. But Walker Buehler, let's get into him tonight. Again, best start as a Red Sox up to this point. 6 1/3, 4 hits, 1 earned, 7 Ks. He ran into a little trouble in the second inning. Rodon, and Heineman got base hits. Willie Abreu had an error there. Rodon got to third, but Buehler ended up limiting that. And pretty much, other than that, not running into a whole lot of trouble today. He was smooth sailing for the most part. Taking a look at the breakdown here, using a lot of different pitches here, leading with the fastball again. I thought maybe, he was going to decrease it after his last start. The fastball last year when he came back with the Dodgers, it wasn't looking all that great. I think a lot of that had to do where his breaking pitches weren't really up to speed. He was still trying to get the feel for him, so I feel like his fastball was pretty easy to predict. But, it did get hit hard last year, but it's nice to see that he's confident with the fastball, so I like that. But we are seeing, what we were thinking was the game plan going to be, coming into the season, right? Going more with the cutter, going with the sinker. And it was a very similar approach to what we saw against the Cardinals. The big difference, though, against the Cardinals, he had the sweeper going a lot. He really decreased that usage today, and he upped the sinker usage. He only threw 6 sinkers last time against the Cardinals, but in this one, he threw 14 of them, and he just had everything working, right? He had just different looks going, right? Pitches breaking in different ways, working the cutter, working the sinker, mixing some change-ups as well. And hey, I'm glad, the curveball, he's comfortable to the point where he is throwing it at least a decent amount of time, 11 knuckle curves on the day. But really what sticks out to me among his pitches was the sinker, right? The spin rate was up on that sinker today. It was looking pretty good. He was getting some good calls on it, getting some swings and misses as well. We're taking a look at the pitch that ended up getting the most whiffs. It was between the four-seamer and the sinker for the most part. But again, he was getting a good amount of contact. He was getting some strikeouts along the way. Just a quality Walker Buehler start, right? Feel like you haven't seen that in a little while, minus the postseason. But Walker Buehler, good day for him. You had some bullpen, a couple of issues with the bullpen. Getting back to this screen here, of course, my button is not working. Once again, why are my buttons not working? Why are my buttons not working? Here we go. But when it came to the bullpen, I felt like they just did a great job at locking it down. You had a lot of guys coming in today. Wilson, he came in right after Buehler. He ended up letting the inherited runner score there, but it was a little weird for Wilson in the seventh inning. I just felt where it got a little funky was when you had Wilson come in, and then Miles Straw ended up pig shading for Rodin. So they brought Wilson in for the lefty-lefty matchup. And I think Cora anticipated that it would end up being Wilson against Miles Straw. And to me, I just felt like with Buehler, his pitch count wasn't too high up to that point. I believe it was still under 90 pitches. I felt like, maybe take a chance on Rodin there. I know he had a base hit against him earlier in the game, but I don't know. I just felt like maybe that could have been a game plan there, or maybe a different reliever. You ended up using Chapman later in the game, but I felt like that could have been a pretty good spot for him to come in and really shut it down. But it is what it is. Ended up not really mattering in the end. But Straw got the base hit. Heineman had the base hit. That ended up tying it up at 1. Vlad had the force out there. That's where this is where things got really frustrating. We finally get the lead. Right? You're feeling good. Like, okay, finally, the Red Sox, we actually have a lead in this series for once. And then Vlad had the force out, grounder to second base. But then Story and Campbell, they had this very awkward exchange where Campbell was very close to the bag. I thought he was just going to take it himself. But then Story, he ended up coming in for it, and it just felt really awkward. And I think there was just a bit of a miscommunication there, and then Story had the bad throw. It just felt awkward all the way around. I think it was just a miscommunication. I think next time something like that happens, if Campbell is close to the bag, he's just going to take it himself. I think Story will talk to him on that. But then again, maybe Story was getting a little confused. You got to remember with Campbell, this is a guy that's played all around. This is where he is playing the majority at second base. So I still feel like he's just learning, just the ins and outs, especially working with Trevor Story. I think it'll end up being fine. But that was a key error at a pretty bad time. They intentionally walked Bo Bichette after that. They got Jimenez to ground out. Then Whitlock, Chapman, Bernardino, Whitlock ended up coming in. And they ended up, held it down for the most part. Where I had a little bit of an issue, though, where you had Springer, who came up later on, top of the 10th. You had the runner there. You had the runner in scoring position. Springer, this is a guy that has just annihilated the Red Sox in his career. I mean, look what the Blue Jays did with Wilyer Brague. Don't even go up against Wilyer Brague. Just have him go to first base, right? Intentionally walk him. Why did we intentionally walk George Springer? A guy that has just had the Red Sox number in his career. He just loves hitting against the Red Sox. I felt like in that situation in the 10th inning with the runner on in scoring position, you should have just given the bag to Springer, man. And, it is what it is. But again, it all didn't matter in the end, but it was a frustrating process to get to that point. But overall, a good day for the pitching. And really when you look at the pitching from a series point of view, it was a good series. They did pitch pretty well. You need a couple little bumps along the way, but you got some very good starts. Tanner Houck, Walker Buehler looking great back-to-back starts. So if you're looking for one positive in a series loss, 3 out of 4, look at the starting pitching, right? Crochet, not at his best, right? But it is what it is. I felt like the starting pitching looked very good. It was just the bats. They couldn't really get anything going. But speaking of the bats, let's get to those bats. I got Trevor Story as my player of the game. I know a lot of people, you got some people that are okay with Story, then you got some people that are frustrated with him. But he ended up having, in the end, a pretty good day for the most part. Had the walk-off dribbler. He went 2 for 5, RBI, and a stolen base in this one. Jarren Duran, he did get thrown out at one point in this game. A key caught stealing. That definitely stunk when that happened. But Duran had himself a pretty solid game for the most part. 2 for 3 with an RBI, a couple of walks, and a stolen base along the way. Bregman went 2 for 5, RBI. Casas, he ended up coming through there along the way. So, hey, nice to see the Red Sox actually getting, more than a couple of runs on the board. But, first inning, this is where I was just like, okay, we're in for another one here today. Raffy had the base hit, but then you had nothing else. Duran and Casas had the strikeout. Second inning, Story had the base hit. He stole second, but then Campbell, Seti, pop out, Wilyer Abreu with the strikeout. And at that point, I'm just thinking, man, okay, all right. If we're going to be able to salvage this series, then it's going to be a battle here today. Third inning, nothing. Narvaez with the strikeout. Duran had the base hit, though, but then Devers ended up getting the double play. Moving on to the sixth inning, again, nothing really happening in the few next innings there, but Duran, the one-out walk, stealing second. Raffy ended up lining out. To be honest, that was actually, I felt like the most excited I got in this series, even though it was a line out. We ended up moving Duran over to third base. I'm like, okay, all right, we got something cooking here for once. And then Bregman came through with the base hit, made it 1-0. And I'm thinking, finally, Bregman has made me the happiest man on the planet. Feels like I've been looking for any kind of happiness with the Red Sox over the last few days. But then seventh inning, KC had the walk. He stole second, overslid the bag. And this is where I think you're, at the end of the day, a rookie is a rookie. You're going to be making these kind of mistakes, right? Christian Campbell, so athletic, man. He slides in. He was there safe, but he just slid past the bag. So, I think a growing pain kind of a day for Christian Campbell, right? Making, that awkward transfer to Trevor Story to, try and get the double play there. And then he had the errant throw. And then oversliding second base. Again, it's like these little things where you kind of, you take them, you put them into the back of your mind, and you learn from those, right? So Christian Campbell, at the end of the day, hey, we love the potential, but he is a rookie. He's going to have to go through these growing pains. Eighth inning. This is where the Red Sox, I was like, okay, we might have something here. Ref Snyder reached on the error. Duran had the walk, but then Raffy with the K. Yimi Garcia, that's when he came in to face Bregman. Bregman ended up beating out the double play. Thank goodness for some hustle there. Hustle in these situations when you're trying to just get anything going, right? And it's been a tough series. A little bit of hustle can go a long way. You had the runners on the corners. Then a pick. This is where it got a little funky. I feel like Blue Jays fans were complaining about the umpires and whatnot. It's like, come on, I always get so tired of the complaining about umpires. It always goes both ways. Blue Jays, they got a few calls in the first few games, and I'm not complaining, right? There are a few strikeout calls where I'm like, oh, that one was a little outside, or getting strike calls along the way. I don't know. I never liked the umpire thing because it always goes both ways. But this is where it got a little funky. Yimi Garcia, pitcher in the dirt, Heidemann, the catcher, he thought it hit Tristan Casas, but it did not. Ended up bouncing away. The runner ended up scoring, and then it got thrown away a little bit. Bregman ended up getting to third. That made it 2-2. But then Casas had the fly out to left. Everyone, it was pretty funny, listening to that, because it looked like he had a good hit ball. It looked like it was a hard hit ball. You could hear the people at Fenway thinking it was probably going to go off the wall, or maybe some of them thought it was a home run. But it was a fly out in the end. Still waiting for that Casas big hit. Still waiting for him to break through. Ninth inning, again, you had something cooking there. Story had the base hit. He stole second. You had the intentional walk to Wilyer. Again, great move from the Blue Jays. Why go up against Wilyer Abreu with the start that he's had this year when you have Seti, who is over-aggressive, and he swings, it feels like, at everything? And yeah, he'll come up with a base hit along the way, and, he'll do some things. But it's like you'd rather go up against Seti there. And that's why I think the Red Sox, they need to put Wilyer in a different spot. I think maybe Cora has him in that spot to give the bottom of the lineup a bit of a boost. But in those situations, it's been back-to-back games now, and when you don't got that protection, you're not going to be able to do much, So Seti had the strikeout. Sable had the strikeout. We go to extra innings. The Blue Jays ended up scoring. Again, you had the runner on third. I would have just walked George Springer in that situation, put him on first base. I get it. Analytical side of things. Maybe you just don't want to be giving up free passes, but I don't know. I'm not going. I don't want to go up against Springer. That guy's owned the Red Sox. And so they ended up scoring there on the sac fly. 10th inning, Duran. This is where it got fun. Duran had the base hit. That scored Sable, the ghost runner, to tie it at 3. But then Duran, he got caught stealing. Raffy saving the day with the base hit. I think that was such a key moment in this game. You had Duran, you're just walking away deflated at that point after getting caught stealing. But then Raffy with the pick-me-up base hit. Bregman got hit by a pitch. Casas got hit by a pitch. Bases loaded. Story with the dribbler. Red Sox win it. Overall, it was a grind. It was a grind of a game today. It was a grind of a series. Yeah, you lost 3 out of 4. But I think these hard-fought series, when you're in the game, even though you feel like you're swinging and missing and everything, the strikeouts were a big concern in this series. I've been seeing a lot of people talking about the amount of strikeouts for the Red Sox. They've been, saying the Red Sox, I believe they were 29th, have the second highest amount of strikeouts in Major League Baseball. You got to look at strikeout percentage because the Red Sox have had more at bats. The Red Sox, I believe, are 13th or 14th in strikeout percentage. So, yeah, I could see the people out there, they're looking at just the strikeout total. They're like, oh my goodness, it's the second most. Well, they've had more at-bats than other teams. You got to look at the strikeout percentage. That's the way you got to do it, in my opinion. So, again, getting back to it, I just think let's make a few tweaks. Why not play around with a couple of things against the White Sox where, not a very strong team. Sure, maybe they pulled out a couple of wins there in the first few games, but this is a team where I feel like you can test out some stuff and you can try some different things with the lineup. Let's bat Wilyer Abreu a little higher. Let's see what he can do in the cleanup spot. There's been many times over the years where you go into a season thinking, okay, this is the perfect lineup, but then maybe it doesn't go your way, right? Guys go through slumps, and maybe even if you swap Casas for Abreu, maybe that could take a little pressure off Casas in that situation. Maybe help him get out of his head a little bit. Wilyer, whose bat has looked great, put him in the 4 spot. You know what I mean? Like, I think that could be a good play. We'll just see if Cora does anything. Maybe he just wants to push through it, stick with the same lineup, and just kind of battle through this slump when it comes to the offense. But I could see maybe a couple tweaks just to try some things out. Cora's always been a guy to try out some different things. So we'll see. But before we do wrap things up here, I am going to go over to Twitter and let's take a look at some of the questions and the comments here. What do we got? Pesky Talk. Good little reaction here. I think this may have come a little earlier. But he just says, I hate everything, Robbie. I hate everything too sometimes, to be completely honest with you. I was definitely hating everything, I think, when you put that. So it always makes me laugh when someone puts that. John Baumstark, bullpen usage. Please discuss. Well, again, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I felt like maybe you could have gone with Chapman over Justin Wilson, where, remember Cora, he kind of said, you could still use Chapman in different situations. I know he's kind of the guy right now when it comes to getting the saves. I felt like that would have been a good spot, when you had some guys on, and you had, you're bringing in Wilson to go up against Rodon, but then you had Straw coming in. They ended up pinch hitting for Straw. I think Chapman against Miles Straw, maybe you would have prevented that base hit from Straw there. And then maybe you just figure it out later on. I understand wanting to hang on to Chapman, though. But overall, I think the bullpen has been pretty solid. I mean, they've really done a good job for the most part this year. What else we got here? I'll do a few more. Here we go. And we just touched on this a little bit earlier. Justin Browsing. Campbell played like a rookie this series. Defense played like rookies this series. Offense performed like they didn't want to be outside. Results, be damned. I think that is a fair assessment of Campbell. Again, yeah, but he played like a rookie this series. Well, because he is a rookie, and rookies are going to go through their growing pains no matter what potential you might have. You could be the number one prospect in baseball. There's going to be little things that happen along the way. Campbell, you got to remember, he was a fast riser through the minors, right? Got drafted out of Georgia Tech. He was pretty good there. Really took him a couple of years to get to the bigs. So, yeah, I think he's going to have those moments, right? Defense, the defense, surprisingly frustrating, on Campbell too, right? If you want to mention him oversliding the bag, the awkward transfer to second base in this one. There's been we had another moment earlier in the series when he had the ground ball going to his left and he just made a bad throw. I think it's also it's going to take him some time to really just get used to second base, I don't think it's going to be perfect, but with Campbell, I got confidence that he'll be okay moving forward. The guy's so athletic. The guys that have the good athleticism, they tend to really catch on to things quicker rather than later. But yeah, offense performed like they didn't want to be outside. Yeah, I mean, guys don't like hitting in the cold. You know what I mean? So, but the Blue Jays, they just did a better job in this series. But again, it really came down to just putting the bat on the ball, putting the ball in play. The Blue Jays, they just did a much better job of that in this series. So, what else we got here? I'll do one more before we go out of here. Before we get out of here. Here we go. I know there was a good one here that I wanted to put out there. Oh yeah, let's talk about Trevor Story. We got this from Caleb Artman. Trevor Story has been looking like Javi Baez at the plate. When it comes to Story here, let's pull up the numbers with him. Mr. Trevor Story. Again, that was kind of one of the more interesting topics, I think, for this year. Now, taking a look at the updated line with him, it's still really early. He hasn't been bad for the most part. Hitting .264 on base. You want to see him get on base a little bit more. OPS 687. What's the slugging? I can't do math in my head. Not a great slugging, 396. You want to see a little bit more out of Story. You don't want him to just be trying to take advantage of hanging breaking balls. That seems to really be his sweet spot at this point. There was another hanging breaking ball today that he took advantage of. But you want to see him do a little bit more. I like Story. I like what he brings. Yes, I know he had the bad throw today, but I don't think that was really an ability kind of a thing. I think that was just the awkwardness of the transfer from Campbell. Again, he does a great job at short, man. You got a veteran guy like this. He's got 4 stolen bases on the year already. This guy is providing you some good speed. I think he's just providing you all those little things. He's giving you that veteran leadership on the field. I know you got Bregman out there, but to me, I'm okay with Story. I do want to see these strikeouts kind of come down a little bit. But I wonder if you start to see the strikeouts build more and more, and maybe, the slash line isn't really doing all that much for you, and Marcelo Meyer's hitting well. Could you at some point, maybe in the next couple of months, see Marcelo Meyer? I don't know. I think there's a lot of things I think that have to go right for that to happen. I think Story would have to be playing bad, or, maybe an injury happens or whatever it may be. Right now I'm okay with Story there. I know it's a little frustrating with the K's, but I'm not at a point where I'm like, okay, get this guy off the field. I think there's more of an argument right now to maybe even look at Roman Anthony, right? To adding him, and maybe having Seti go into more of a utility kind of a role, something like that. I see more of that because I feel like they need to do something there. I think they need some more protection. Could Roman be that guy? If you're bringing up Roman, that's a big move, man. That's a big move. If you go that route, I don't think they're there yet. I think they would like Roman to get more ABs down there, get more into a rhythm. I'm not ready to, have Wilyer, go to the bench right now. It's too early. It's April 10th. You got to give this until like June at least, in my opinion. So that's just what I'm thinking. But everybody, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to wrap it up right there. Hey, again, not the series you wanted, but a good way to end the series. This is the way you want to go into your next series against the White Sox. It is a 3-game set before they go to Tampa. And let's go over to the previews here. And, like I said, the White Sox, not really a whole lot that's going on, but they got some, like I said, Chase Meigroff, right? So Sean Newcomb, he's going to be going game 1. The game is tomorrow at 7:40 p.m. Eastern time at Wright Field. And then going up against Davis Martin, hasn't looked all that great so far. Richard Fitz, he's been giving you some quality starts. He's going up against a veteran in Martin Perez. And then the third game of the series should be pretty fun. Garrett Crochet going up against Shane Smith. Garrett Crochet going back to Chicago. That's always cool. But Shane Smith is off to a pretty good start this year. I think that is going to end up being a pretty decent matchup. I am going to be live on playback for that game. So in case, I know I've been really pushing playback as of late. If you want to watch the game with me, go download the playback app, connect your MLB TV account, go join my room. Just go to playback TV/Robbie Hyde, and you'll be able to come watch the game with me. I think I'm going to do one for Sunday. I'm going to see if I can maybe get a couple of guests to pop in, possibly. I'm still working on that. But, hey, that'll be fun to watch Crochet for that game. So, again, if you want to watch it with me, go join my room on playback. But a much-needed win going into what I think should be a very winnable series, obviously. But you never know what can happen. On paper, it's always... it could say one thing, but you got to play the games, right? In the end, everybody, it was a good win today. Glad we got the walk-off heading to Chicago. But everybody, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for joining me with the post-game show. If you can on the way out, hit the like button for me. Subscribe if you're new. If you are with us in audio format, Spotify, Apple, whatever it may be, leave us a 5-star review. It really does help us out. But everybody, I'm out of here. Thanks for joining, and I'll talk to you next time.